In this video, we'll be extending on the area of a circle with something called compound shapes. Compound shapes will use what we know about other shapes, so let's review those real quick. For any rectangles or squares, the area comes from doing length times width. So for this first one that's kind of tall, I would be doing 7 times 11 for an area of 77 square centimeters. For a square, they're both the same, so I could either do 4 times 4 or 4 squared. So here I would get 16 inches squared. So rectangles or squares are length times width. The other shape you might see is a triangle, and remember the only difference for a triangle is once you do base times height, you divide it by 2. So for this little one, I would do 5 times 6 and divide that by 2, which gets me 15. And for this taller one, remember you're gonna want the inside height, not like the slanted height or the sides. So here I would do 4 times 10 divided by 2, and that gives me 20. So these are gonna be some key things to remember here when we're talking about compound shapes. The other thing we're gonna look at is when you have a part of a circle. So before that, let's look at if we had a normal full circle. The area of a circle is pi r squared. So for this first one, I see that my radius is 12. So that area would be pi times 12 squared. So in terms of pi, I could leave it as 144 pi. Or if I wanted to actually multiply that out, I would take that 144 and multiply it by 3.14, which gets me 452.16. So that would be if I had a full circle. If you look at the two below, I have less than a full circle. If I were to continue this shape, and if it was a full circle, I see that this one is only a half of a circle. And then similarly, if I were to continue this, not as good, but I see I have a quarter of a circle. Anytime you have a part of a circle, you're going to start off by finding the area as if it was a complete circle. So to do that, you're going to do pi r squared. For this first example, that 24 is my diameter because it goes all the way across, which means my radius is 12. So to find the area of what the full circle would be, I would do pi times my radius squared, which happens to be the same as that top example. So I know the answer is 452.16. Since I have a half of a circle, that means I would have half the area of what a full circle would be. So to compensate for that, what I'm going to do is take this area and divide it by 2. So the area of this half circle would come from 452.16 divided by 2, which gets me an area of 226.08. Same thing would happen for a quarter of a circle. I'm going to start by finding the area of what the full circle would be. Here my radius is 8. I know it's a radius because it only goes halfway. So if this were a full circle, I would get 200.96. This time I have a quarter of a circle. So instead of dividing by 2, I would divide by 4. And that piece of that circle would have an area of 50.24 inches squared. So let's look at how to use these. Compound shapes can be 2 or more different shapes that are added together or put together. So if you look at this picture, it looks like a window, and I don't have a formula to find the area of all of that together. But what I can do is break that down into shapes that I recognize. So if I look at this specific one, it looks like I have a half circle here. And what it tells me about that half circle is that my diameter would be 24 inches. And then the other shape that I have going on would be a rectangle. And what I know about that rectangle is that its dimensions are 24 inches by 36 inches. So what I can do to find the area of all of it together is find the area of each piece and then add those together. So let's start with the rectangle because I think it's the easiest. Area of a rectangle comes from length times width. So I would do 24 times 36, and that gets me an area for that rectangle of 864. Okay, so that's one piece of this. This bottom rectangle here is all 864. So that to then find what that half circle would be, if the diameter is 24, that means the radius is 12. So I would want to do pi times 12 squared. And that gets me 452.16. But I have half of a circle, so I need to cut that and divide it by 2. So the area of that half circle on the top of my window looking object would be 226.08. So the total of that shape together would come from adding my two pieces. So 206.08 plus 864. So my total area of the whole shape would be 1,090 and 8/100ths. So break it down into the pieces that you see and add those pieces together. Let's quickly do another example. Here, if I start breaking it down into the shapes that I see, I have a half circle, which is telling me my radius is 6. I have a rectangle here, and it tells me that base is 18. We'll come back to what the height of that would be. And then I have another half circle at the end with a radius of 6. So we could find the area of those two half circles. I could take, I know circles are pi r squared, so pi times 6 squared. So 3.14 times 6 squared would give me an area of 113.04. Since I have a half circle, I'd want to take that and divide it by 2. So the area of that left piece would be 56.52. I would do the same thing for the one on the right. Pi times 6 squared. It's a half circle, so I'd want to divide that by 2. And again, I would get 56.52. Notice 2 half circles are the same as one full circle. So I could have taken out the part in red and just done what the area of one circle would be together, because half circle plus a half circle is a nice normal full circle. So you could use that as a shortcut if you wanted. Now what we need before we find the area of that rectangle would be what this dimension is. So let's use the radius of that circle to help us. I know that halfway across is the same as the radius, so that would be 6, which means that the other half would also be 6. So that dimension of that rectangle comes from 6 plus 6, which is 12. So then to find the area of this rectangle, I could do 12 times 18, and that gets me 216. So my total area for this, it kind of reminds me of like the inside of a track outside, would come from my 56.52 plus 216 plus the 56.52. And let's see what my total area would be. I got 329.04. The last example we're going to look at is slightly different. Let's take a look. Compound shapes could also be subtracted from one another. So if you look at this figure, it almost looks like a flag. I have this darker outer rectangle with a circle that's right in the middle of it. So if I wanted to find the area of just the shaded region, so just the part that's gray, instead of adding them together, I want to subtract. I want to take that outer shape of my rectangle, which is 5 by 6, and I want to subtract the inner shape of that circle with a radius of 2. So instead of adding them together, I'm taking the circle out of the rectangle. So that rectangle of 5 by 6, again, that comes from length times width. So I would do 5 times 6 to get an area of 30. I have a full circle, so pi r squared would be 3.14 times 2 squared. And that gets me 12.56. So the area of just the gray, or it'll be called the shaded region, will come from 30 minus the 12.56. So the rectangle with that circle taken out of it. So the area of the gray region would be 17.44, and here my units are feet squared. So just in summary, whenever you have compound shapes, you're going to want to break them down into the smaller shapes that you recognize. So it'll be some combination of rectangles, triangles, circles, or parts of circles. From there, you're going to find the area of each piece. The pieces that you'll need: a rectangle is length times width, a triangle is base times height divided by 2, and then, of course, the new ones that we've been working on, circles, are pi r squared. So you'll use each of those, and then you'll need to determine, are you adding the areas together or are you subtracting? So adding looks like these shapes are next to each other. You find those pieces and add them together. Subtracting would be like your shaded regions. So you have some sort of outer shape, and you need to subtract the inner shape to get only what that shaded piece would be. Let me know if you have any questions.